Welcome to Your Texas Land, the place where we take a deep dive into all things related to land in Texas. I'm your host, Shane Kiefer, and I'm happy to have you join us today. In each episode, we explore topics that might affect you as a landowner. And today, I am pleased to be joined by John Kinsey, our brand new, as of this week, Director of Ecological Services from Plateau Land and Wildlife Management. We are very excited to have John on board. He brings a wealth of experience to us. It's going to be a big benefit to our landowners and clients and partners going forward. So thanks for joining us today, John.
Thanks for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. So I just want people to get to know you. Some folks listening may know John from his past work at Parks and Wildlife and various other places. For those of you who aren't familiar with John at all, I just want to give them a sense of where you come from, what you're doing here, what brought you to Plateau, because like I said, we're real excited to have you. So let's start at the beginning. It's always a good place to start. Where are you from? And how'd you get into natural resources to from the beginning?
Sure. So I grew up in Lockhart, not too terribly far from here. Grew up in town, but was lucky enough to have some property north of town. My grandparents were able to get just shy of 100 acres with their GI Bill. And so every time that I had a little bit of free time after school, in the summers when I wasn't on the baseball field, I was out there running around, fishing, and just exploring the outdoors. And that's what really grounded me in natural resources and, gave me the appreciation for nature. So from there, I did a little time in the summers working with a guy that did chemical immobilization for ungulates.
Oh, really?
And so I was able to actually put my hands on animals and just open my eyes up to a whole new world and realizing that you can do stuff like this for a living.
How old were you when you did that?
I started doing that around 17, 18 years old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so that was just a summer gig and ended up, oddly enough, I had no desire to go to college. None. I'm not sure exactly what I was going to do, but I had no desire to go to college. And I had a good friend of mine pick up the phone one day and was like, hey, I'm going to this little university over here and they're looking for people to play baseball. And I was like, oh, well, I know I do want to play baseball. So I ended up going to Schreiner University there in Kerrville for a little while and playing baseball. It was a circuitous path for me to end up out at Sul Ross to finish my degree in natural resource management. So that's the beginning.
That's great. And so a little bit of a spoiler, I'm going to jump out a little bit. For someone who didn't want to go to college, you ended up with a PhD.
I did.
So you are Dr. John Kinsey. And so you obviously took to it pretty well. Sul Ross, fantastic natural resources program, produced a lot of good folks. It's way out there in Alpine and West Texas. Tell us about your time out there.
Sure. I'm a little biased here, but I think it might be the best wildlife school in the state. So this predated Borderlands Research Institute. Lewis Harbison was out there trying to build the program up into what it is today. But I went out there in 2005 and I left in 2008, and it just the great part about being at a university like Sul Ross, where it's out in an incredibly rural area, but it's a small university and it allows for hands-on learning. It's not just sitting in a classroom reading books. We actually get to go outside and get some experiential learning. And I think, those types of universities, there's a handful of them, and even our larger universities are noticing and reverting back. A&M completely revamped their system. Texas Tech has completely revamped their system. So they see the value in that. But I was just lucky enough to get into that at an early age.
I'll echo that on the smaller schools. So I went to Tech for my undergrad, a big program, great, good range component built in, which A&M is also copying at this point. But that served me real well. But I got really good advice from Dr. Jim Caffey when I was looking for a grad school. He's like, have you looked at Texas State? It's a small program. It's only master's students, lots of hands-on stuff. And it's same experience. Spent a lot of time in the field. I picked up as much experience in the field there as I have anywhere else in my time in grad school, and that was irreplaceable. I learned 300 or 400 grasses in range plant ID at Texas Tech on pressed dried paper, but going out and learning field ID it stuck a lot better. at Texas State. So yeah, those small schools do a real good job in general of getting students out on the ground, learning stuff hands-on.
They sure do. And I had some great examples of some grad students there that I looked up to. I won't say their name. I won't give them that satisfaction. It gave me the idea that maybe I wanted to continue my education. I got to assist on some research projects, kind of fell in love with the research aspect of what we do. And so as I was finishing up at Sul Ross, I went to Dr. Harbison and was like, I think I'm going to pursue a master's degree. And he said, that's great. Not here. It's a little taken aback, right? It's like, well, what do you mean? And he was like, no. It's like, nothing against you, but here's a little bit of advice. Open your mind, get some new experiences, go different places, learn from different people, because the perspectives that you get from here, from our faculty, from the students here, are very different than what you can get somewhere else. So I did. I left Sul Ross. Actually, my intention was to go get some real world experience before I pursued a master's degree. Yep. It was really tough to find a job back then. It's actually still pretty tough to find a job. I think Oregon State University put out a research paper not too long ago that said roughly 19% of their graduates with a natural resource degree end up with a full-time job in natural resources. And, that the percentage varies greatly, but it just gives you an idea of how difficult it is to break into this field. And during that year that I kind of took off working odd jobs, I ran into somebody at an antique store in Fredericksburg, Texas, and I was wearing a Sul Ross baseball cap. And they said, oh, Sul Ross, I got a degree from there. So, yeah, what's your degree in? Natural resource management. And it just was like, oh.
To be clear, they were working at the antique shop.
They were working at the antique shop, right, which is, I'm sure, a great job and a great life, but not what I wanted to do. Yeah. So kind of opened my eyes and lit a fire under me to, if I'm really going to do this, I better start getting serious about going to get a master's degree to make myself a little more competitive in these applicant pools. So I did. I didn't have a great approach to it, or maybe I did have a great approach to it. I Googled every university in the state of Texas that had anything related to a wildlife or natural resource degree and emailed every faculty member on their web pages, hey, this is who I am. This is my background. These are the things that I'm interested in. Do you have any projects? Yeah, a few called back. There was a very low return rate, but ended up Dr. Backus, John Backus at Texas State called me. He said, hey, look, I've got the fully funded quail project. And I grew up in Lockhart. You know how many quail there are in Lockhart? There's not very many.
That's right.
So I had some conversations with him, reached out to some folks. I was like, I don't really know anything about this species. They were like, that's the whole point. Go learn. So I ended up getting a master's degree there at Texas State under Dr. Backus. And Dr. Harbison was right. The perspectives and just the focus of what people are working on at Texas State at that time was vastly different than what was going on at Sul Ross. And so it could not have been better advice.
Yeah, I got the same advice, not from Dr. Harbison, but it's good. It's sound advice. It took me to Texas State, too, as I mentioned, also working under Dr. Backus. And, yeah, that perspective changed. That shifted my whole focus. And I was fortunate when I found out that a wildlife biologist was a job. I said, oh, that's what I want to do. And I was, 12 or 13. It's like, oh, you can get paid to do that. Sounds great. Hunting and fishing, grew up just like you doing that. So I was always game focused. Always. That was my interest. I wanted to go work on quail, maybe for grad school. And I did. Dr. Backus had a project for me working out in the Lost Pines on deer, wild turkey, because that was my interest. But so while I did that, but my whole perspective changed. All the work and attention I got to focus on non-game, on herps, on all sorts of other species that it's not that I wasn't interested in them. I just didn't ever think about spending much time on them. And because a lot of the funding for my research was coming from Houston toad money, I got to work with a lot of Houston toad stuff while doing that, and completely changed my perspective on what a wildlife biologist can do. And working here at Plateau, when I first started here, while a lot of people really are interested in game species, that's still often the first thing is, what about deer? What about deer? more than half of our landowners are really want to focus on non-game species. They're interested in songbirds, they're interested in pollinators, interested in things that aren't game species. And so having that perspective has been really valuable working with private landowners, because that's what I wanted to do too. I just thought, I'll be working with private landowners on deer. Well, a lot of private landowners, they may not like deer, but that's not their focus. And they don't have enough land to really manage deer well. So that's been exceptionally valuable. So we share that little bit of history, both a major professor and the advice to go do something different, go get a different perspective on things. So,
yeah, and I had very similar focus. Like I was interested in game species, hunting, fishing. Those are the things that got me into the outdoors. Those were where my passions were at the time. But coming out of grad school in 2011 was a tough time to find a job.
Yep.
I really wanted to go to work for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. You can blame Meredith Longoria for that one. She came in and gave a great presentation to us there at Texas State one time, and I was like, that's what I want to do. So that is what I wanted to do. But coming out of school in 2011, like I said, it was tough times trying to get a job at Texas Parks and Wildlife as a biologist.
it was in 2014. That didn't change.
So I ended up getting a job as an environmental consultant, a biologist for an environmental consulting firm based out of Austin. I got to do things that I never thought I would do, got to experience places that I never thought I would be able to experience. I worked for months at a time in Wyoming, Montana, Nevada, got to work with species that really opened my eyes to other things.
Species you really knew nothing about.
Absolutely nothing about, right? There wasn't a whole lot of desert tortoise in Lockhart, Texas either. So I just looked at that as continuing education, right? I knew it wasn't exactly where I wanted to be, but I got a lot of value from it, and was eventually able to hire on with Texas Parks and Wildlife. Then I think it was 2013 as a district biologist. I was living in Ballinger. I had Coke, Coleman, Concho, and Runnels counties, and working with private landowners there, helping them establish management plans, and in some cases implement some of their strategies and tools and techniques. And I loved it. It was great. I mean, if you're going to be a private lands biologist, in my opinion, there's far west Texas, but I'm biased there too.
Sure.
But there's really not much of a better place to be to do that kind of work. The diversity in work there was great. I was getting bobwhite quail calls. I was getting turkey calls. I was getting white-tailed deer calls. It was diverse, right? It wasn't just like singularly focused on one species. So it was great. I loved it. But I always had that passion for research deep down, and I had this crazy goal of getting a research job with Parks and Wildlife on a wildlife management area, and using that research to go get a PhD. And there aren't very many research biologist positions in Texas Parks and Wildlife.
I think you told me you were one of how many?
One.
One of one. That's right.
I did have a research coordinator, Justin Foster, great mentor of mine. And I spent 8 years working beside Justin Foster there on the Kerr Wildlife Management area. And our primary focus was researching novel control techniques for feral pig populations. So,
I want to get into that because I know that'll be of interest to folks. Everybody likes talking about wild pigs, especially ways to control wild pigs. I want to briefly go through your time at not only at your first job there with an environmental consulting firm, but you did spend after Parks and Wildlife, spend a little time at another one, Bowman Consulting, similar jobs, right? So, and that's an area of private sector natural resources work that we don't deal with at Plateau, but is an important component to kind of the environmental work that goes on in the private side, right? Outside of government work, outside of nonprofit work, there's this world of private sector natural resources management that these consulting firms are doing. Can you give folks just a brief idea of what kinds of work those companies do and why you were in Wyoming or wherever it was?
So as our population increases, the human population increases, we have to build more dwellings. We have to build more shops. So there's going to be some land development There's also some energy development that goes on as well. And anytime you're going to purchase a piece of property and change the use of that property, there are federal and state regulations that have to be abided by. And whether that's the Clean Water Act, so wetland delineations, making sure that big picture, the job is to make sure that that development is happening in a place where it's not going to have significant negative impacts to the ecosystem, and it is being done in a way that is not going to have significant negative impacts to the ecosystem. And it was my job, it was our job as consultants to help guide those developers to do things by the letter of the law and what's the right thing for the ecosystem.
Right. So they're hiring you to make sure that they're following those laws on environmental protection or whether endangered species protection or whatever it is. Clean Water Act, all that. Okay, gotcha. So pigs, so about pigs and cur, and we'll have, there's plenty of topics there to explore in the future for podcasts that I'm sure folks would be interested in, but talk about the work you did on wild pigs at Cur WMA.
Sure. So I mentioned Justin Foster, my research coordinator there. They were sitting and having a conversation one day before I got there, and they said, what meaningful research can we do that actually has a true large-scale impact to natural resources and private landowners in Texas? And one of the technicians that was working there at the time said, well, if you want to do something, you should figure out how to control these pigs. And that just set Justin off. He's a bulldog. Once he gets it in his mind and decides that this is a worthwhile project, you can't beat him off of it. And so he just took it and ran with it. And he, right there in Kerr County, Texas, started doing research and started developing partnerships with people in New Zealand and Australia. Developed a very strong partnership with the USDA National Wildlife Research Center there in Fort Collins, Colorado. And they started working on the development of an oral toxicant, a sodium nitrite-based oral toxicant for pigs. It had already been in the works in Australia and New Zealand, but it wasn't registered for use in the United States.
They were using it in Australia and New Zealand already.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. They were using it experimentally in Australia. It had been registered in New Zealand. They weren't using it very widely. During my time there on the project, we actually did successfully get it registered in Australia. So you can go, landowners can go get it and use it in Australia. So that was 8 years of my life researching development. When I first got there, we knew that sodium nitrite, if consumed in appropriate quantities, would kill pigs. It's just reliably getting them to consume the bait was really tough.
It doesn't taste good, right?
It's terrible. It's the saltiest.
Not in the quantities you need to kill them.
It is the saltiest salt that you can think of. Yeah. And not only does it not taste good, but it oxidizes very rapidly. And as it oxidizes, it's got this gaseous off-put.
Oh, really?
It smells a lot like chlorine.
Oh,
it's very strong.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and it's our partners there in Australia at Animal Control Technologies Australia would describe sodium nitrite as an angry chemical. Okay. Anytime it came into contact with anything, in the slightest bit of moisture, it would start to deteriorate. It would off gas. So figuring out how to put this chemical in a bait that pigs would reliably consume, that was the biggest hurdle in all of this. And we finally ended up having to get some chemists and some folks in the pharmaceutical world to microencapsulate each individual grain of sodium nitrite so that we could get it in a bait and reliably get it to pigs. And once we were able to do that, mortality rates were greater than 95% in our pin trials. There's a whole EPA process to register something like that, and it's step by step, and it's very thorough. It's incredibly thorough, but it's also not designed for pigs. Like the process is kind of designed for white lab mice in this incredibly controlled environment in this laboratory, and when you take those steps and processes outside of that environment and try to implement it to free range or to, at that time, pigs in a pen, It didn't always work out like they wanted. So the EPA learned a lot about pigs. We learned a lot about the EPA. We ended up developing a great relationship. But yeah, like I said, did that for 8 years. We successfully deployed the toxicant in Australia a couple times. I didn't get to go on those trips.
Shame.
But we deployed it in North Texas and Alabama as well successfully. But ultimately, here past couple of years, they hit some snags in the design of the product, and they've kind of shelved it for a little while. They're still working on the toxicant. They're still working on a toxicant,
Right.
but it looks a little different.
Gotcha. Again, that's we'll do a different podcast on that because there's a lot to talk about there, and there are other approaches to toxicants for pigs that people may have heard of and we get questions about. But I don't want to divert us too much here because we'll end up taking up the whole time talking about that. So that's the work that turned into your PhD, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Right, and it being a research and design type process, you hit snags. Anytime that we had to change a formulation of the bait, which we did several times, the data that I had collected at that point was obsolete and had to go back to the drawing board. And I had this great plan. It was mapped out, and I laid it down on my advisor's desk whenever I was pitching the idea to UTSA to take me on as a PhD student. And I was like, hey, I'm going to have this knocked out in 2 years. 9 years later, I finally graduated.
You blame it on the EPA. So, right. Yeah. That's not your fault.
Tons of factors in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the interim, you continued to work for Texas Parks and Wildlife?
I worked for Texas Parks and Wildlife until 2022.
Okay.
And then, that advice that Dr. Harbison gave me to experience different things and to, just go listen to other people, go get different experiences. I kind of took that to heart and tried to apply that to a lot of places in my life. And my career being one of them. I felt like maybe I'd stagnated a little bit where I was, and that just doesn't sit well with me. I like to challenge myself. I like to go do new things. And so ended up leaving Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and took a project manager position with Bowman Consulting, working with Dr. Sarah Weaver. That was a great experience for me. Learned completely new skill sets. I had some experience in the industry, but it was a very different consulting firm that did things very, very differently. But that was a great experience for me to learn how to manage remote field staff and large, diverse projects and big budgets. And I was having fun. I was having a ton of fun, but I ended up kind of getting headhunted a little bit by this company called Field Engine Wildlife Research and Management. And Field Engine is the parent company to Pig Brig Trap Systems.
Right, which some of our listeners have probably heard of. See Pig Brig lots of places. Those are the net-based pig traps, right? Highly mobile, highly. So you went to work with them, yeah?
Went to work for them. I was director of business and conservation initiatives. And so my focus was really working with government entities, building on some of the relationships that I had already established with various government entities, with universities, with NGOs, and trying to build trust. Honestly, it was a new product. Anytime a new product hits the market, there's skepticism. And so just building trust within our community of natural resource professionals. And I did that for about a year and a half. I was over the Americas, so North and South America and Asia Pacific. So I got to experience a lot of really cool things and understand different people's perspectives on pigs and pig management from a global perspective.
That's speaking of getting different perspectives. We think it's hard to manage pigs here. I imagine that managing pigs in some of the terrain in the Southeast Pacific is quite a different challenge.
It's an incredibly different challenge. And the terrain is one thing, but the fact that they're native and indigenous species. Right. So the social and political perspectives around managing those populations.
Kind of like managing white-tailed deer around here, right?
Yeah,
People get a
especially
little, sometimes you got to be a little careful.
Right.
That's right.
That's what I equated it to, was like urban deer management in Texas.
Yeah, because they're a problem, but we love them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I can see that. So yeah, you've got that worldly experience from your time with Pig Brig, and I presume that they found you because of your work on feral pig toxicants, right? And so Pig Brig, and then back to Bowman briefly, right?
Correct.
As you kind of transitioned out of that, and then to give folks background, I've known you for several years. We've certainly professionally, we share friends and lots of colleagues. I've watched you kind of develop through your career. I'd be remiss to point out, you mentioned a couple times you had a plan. Mm-hmm. One of your plans for your career was to be president of the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society, right? So, which you did fairly early in your career, actually. Tell us about Texas chapter a little bit, and then talk about why you wanted to do that, why that meant so much to you, and what you accomplished there.
Sure. Texas chapters, I grew up in Texas chapter. I learned how to be a professional because of the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society. And just a brief description of the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society. It's a professional organization, and it's a chapter of the national and now international society, the Wildlife Society. We have chapters in Canada and Mexico now, but each state has an individual chapter of the Wildlife Society. And we have just shy of 1,000 members, and we're roughly...
It's the biggest state chapter, isn't it?
It is the biggest state chapter, by far, the biggest state chapter, and the best. Yeah. But again, I try not to let my biases bleed out, but I'm doing
everybody here listening's probably all right with that one. So, yeah, we'll brag on Texas.
But it's roughly 50% made up of students that are seeking degrees in wildlife, natural resource management.
Yep.
And 50% working professionals. And sure, I presented research there as a student. I presented research there as a professional. I got heavily involved in the chapter itself. And then while I was a district biologist for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, the chapter, Dr. Selma Glasscock actually founded and started a leadership institute within the Texas chapter called the James G. Tier Conservation Leadership Institute. And there was an early career professional training that she put together. It was her brainchild. And I was lucky enough to be a member of the first cohort of that, along with several other folks that are leaders in the industry.
Some of whom also work here,
Some
right?
of them absolutely work here.
Tucker Slack was in that group.
Tucker
Sarah
was in my
Kalick
group.
was in that group. I think Romy was in that first group too, as well.
Yes, he
Romy
was.
Swanson, who used to work here.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a lot of James G. Tier folks, so we can speak highly of that program. It's a fantastic career development program. Yeah,
It was a great program, and it just got me that much more exposed to the inner workings of the Texas chapter and all the good that the Texas chapter does for students and professionals and our natural resources from a policy standpoint as well. And I had watched several of my giants in the field, people that I really look up to, be president of the Texas chapter before, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to do that. And as I was going through the Leadership Institute, identified some strategy to implement that. And what I was trying to do was be chair of every committee or subcommittee within the Texas chapter. I think there's 32 of them now or something.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's quite.
Yeah, I didn't quite make it all the way through before I was asked to run for president. And before that, I ran for secretary. So I was secretary. I held several chair positions, but I was lucky enough to be nominated and elected president of the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society. That's one of my proudest achievements, moments, to be trusted and recognized by your peers as somebody that can take the reins of an organization as important as that.
Again, it's a sizable organization, right? It's the biggest state chapter, 1,000 members, a large conference each year. And just for everybody listening, again, if you're not familiar with Texas chapter, aside from being the professional society for wildlife biologists in the state and the national chapter, of course, for in the nation, Texas chapter does a lot of work on wildlife policy and law. They pay attention to laws at the Capitol that are good for natural resources and for wildlife management. So and all the work is done by volunteers, right? So nobody's getting paid to do anything. It's all volunteer work because it's a professional society, but they put in a lot of time and energy and effort into not only developing professional students and professionals, but also into helping guide policy here in Texas regarding wildlife and land management. So really, really important society for conservation here in the state. So being president's no minor thing, certainly. You got anything from traveling overseas?
So I was lucky enough working for Field Engine or Pig Brig to get to do some international travel. And I spent about a month in Australia. The coolest thing about that was through my work with Parks and Wildlife and developing the Toxicant, I had developed relationships with some wildlife professionals in Australia. So as I was going through Australia, doing everything that I needed to be doing for Pig Brig, I was able to go spend time with them and their families and experience some parts of Australia that I think, most tourists probably don't get to do. So that was a ton of fun. We went out to a little community in Queensland called Injune, and it was a very small, quaint community. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful landscape. Seeing the different vegetation and the different wildlife that was around there was one of the coolest things I got to do. But we bounced around, or I was there by myself. I bounced around the entire east coast of Australia for a month, going to conferences and giving presentations and trap demonstrations. That was a ton of fun. But I was also able to go to Hong Kong. And I think Hong Kong was probably the most eye-opening for me from how do we deal with this species type perspective, because again, it is a native species and it's an adored animal. And so the public, there's social and political pushback to managing those populations like we were discussing earlier. But it's so
these are wild pigs, just like these aren't domestic. These aren't domestic pigs. These
are not domestic pigs. These are wild boar.
Yeah.
So a lot of the population of pigs, the vast majority of the population of wild pigs that you see in Texas are from domestic stock, primarily.
Fertilized domestic pigs. Yeah.
Absolutely. But these animals, when we're in Asia and Europe, they're wild boar. They're what you think of when you think of, Eurasian wild boar, the big ridgebacks, the large tusks. So, but Suscrofa is Suscrofa, right? The species is the species. So they can breed with the domestic pigs. And that's what happened here a lot. But over there, it's purely wild boar. So there's some small differences in behavior and biology, but largely speaking, no, that they're very, very much the same animal. And when populations get to a tipping point, they absolutely become an invasive species. So something has to be done to curb the damage that that population is causing. But their biologists were not allowed to go into the field, into the jungle, and reduce the population at the source for various reasons. They were stuck in this perpetual loop of managing urban boar populations. So where there's damage, where there's a problem, we're going to go react to that. And so the first trap that they took us to, and the reason I was there was to teach them how to trap pigs, how to remove pigs from the landscape. And the first trap that they took us to was about 10 feet behind a public bus stop. And that's just where they could trap. Hong Kong's very rugged. It's very, very steep topography, very dense vegetation. Once you get outside of the cities, it's really tough. It's tough to put a pig trap up. So understanding some of the challenges that they were facing and trying to come up with unique solutions for them, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
Excellent. So you haven't been here long, but let's talk about how you got here. Other than me calling you or finding you at Texas chapter perhaps and saying, "Hey, let's talk about you coming to work for Plateau." I'll say again, and I think people will hear it in the background stories that you've given people today. We're really excited to have you here. Your drive, your passion, your commitment to natural resources and learning, constantly learning. And we're really excited about applying that to the folks that we work with every day. Our landowners, our private landowners, our partners too, and helping develop new partnerships so we can do more good work in this state on private lands and for wildlife conservation. So let's talk a little about that. What excites you about being here? What are you looking forward to about getting into an area that you haven't really worked directly in? You did some private land stuff with Parks and Wildlife. That's a little different perspective. And you've done private sector stuff on the regulatory side. So this is a little different role for you. So what's interesting about it to you? I guess is a less loaded way to say it.
Sure. No, like I said, I grew up on just shy of 100 acres, very small property to some, very, very big to me. And so I've got that connection to the land, and I understand some of the hardships that there are for private landowners in Texas. I think, look, we say, like I'm gonna spit out some stats, but the stats change daily. Sure. 95% privately owned, 83% of that private land is rural working lands, and that 83% of Texas is owned by 1% of the population.
That's about right. Yep.
And that's a great responsibility that I think most people don't understand and realize. The ecosystem services that are provided by those private lands, be it carbon sequestration or groundwater recharge, we could there's a laundry list there.
Food, fiber, yep.
Absolutely. The onus is on those private landowners, that 1% of our population, to provide those benefits for the entire population of Texas. And that's not a small ask of them.
That's right.
And they do a really good job of it. But there's knowledge that we have, there's skill sets that we have that are just intuitive to us at this point through our work and our schooling that a lot of those private landowners don't have. So being able to help them learn and grow and implement some of the wildlife and land management techniques that we preach all the time, that's incredibly important, because nothing is going to get done in the name of conservation in the state of Texas without private landowners.
That's right. Yeah, that's the basis for our mission right here. And I often tell people when they ask what we do, because they don't always understand what wildlife biologists do, and certainly not outside of, Texas Parks and Wildlife maybe, or other government entities. I often describe it as one-on-one education, right? That's what we do. We're educating Texas landowners one at a time, and it can be really effective. It takes time, but that's why the folks that are here, because they really enjoy that part of it. Ask any of them. It's working with the landowners that's the best part of the job, and educating them. And all the things that we try to provide, whether it's helping them ensure that they've got this very powerful incentive to keep doing things. But as outside of that, the other services we provide, whether it's mapping or wildlife surveys or those sorts of things, it's to give them more information about their land, right? It's to teach them as much as possible about their piece of land, because that's their most valuable asset in a lot of cases. And it's the thing they care about the most. Tremendous amount of passion from our landowners, and that feeds and is fed by the passion we got from the folks that work here too, and I think folks sense that in you too. So,
but I also think we're at a really fun time to be doing what we're doing, working with private landowners. As I mentioned, the population of Texas is exploding. They're not making any more land. So we're seeing fragmentation on the landscape, which is, big picture, probably not a great thing, right? We want large continuous tracts of quality habitat, and they're getting chopped up. But every new landowner is a new opportunity for us to reach and educate. And not only that, we're in the middle of the largest generational land transfer in Texas history. So your original landowners or your second, third generation landowners are passing on, and they're leaving that land to their children or somebody else. So that's another opportunity to reach a new audience. And we're not lacking for opportunity by any means.
For sure.
And that's
why we're here, because there's lots of opportunity.
You could have one perspective about it and kind of get down on some of those things. And there are some negative consequences to some of these things. But it's all about perspective, how you look at it. And I do try to look at it that way. I just got a ton of new people to talk to and educate and be able to, deliver my passion to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, one of my hopes remains that we can we often say it like this. Is that ownership fragmentation doesn't necessarily have to result in habitat fragmentation, right? Lines on a map don't interrupt wildlife use of the land. It's that it is the development, it is how you use that land. Mm-hmm. But if you've got 100 acres of intact habitat, that's great. If you've got 10-acre parcels of mostly intact habitat, and they're all working towards a common goal of stewarding their land for wildlife, it's yes, you've got some more human use on the landscape, but it's better than 10 people doing 10 different things and paving over it or changing the use to something completely different. So it's an opportunity to have wherever we can. And again, it's a private land state. Folks get to do what they want with their property. That's an important Texas value, is that it's your land and you can do what you want with it within the law and within, so long as you're not disturbing your neighbors too much. Mm-hmm. And so, respecting those choices and finding ways to work with folks who otherwise just want to take care of their property the best they can, and they do. We joke all the time about that site visit with a landowner with 15 acres often takes longer than a site visit with a landowner with 1,000, right? Because they want to see everything, they want to know everything they can about their little piece of Texas. And it's not that the 1,000-acre landowner doesn't care. It's just they got a lot of land and a lot of things to deal with. But those small property owners are just as passionate, if not more so in some cases, because they're new to the landscape. And that's what they know, and that's what they want to do. They want to take care of their little piece of Texas. So that's what we're here to help do. So what else do you have what else do you want people to know? What else do you want to say about either being here or just being in this field?
I'm just really excited to be here, to have that opportunity to work with those private landowners. 19% of the graduates from Oklahoma or Oregon State University end up with a long-term career in this field. And that's great perspective to remind yourself of, right? How lucky we are to have a career doing what we do. And admittedly, I spend entirely too much time staring at a computer screen these days, but it's to facilitate others doing good work. And I can live with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is. I've said this before too, and tell people this all the time. I've suffered from the fortunate situation of being able to. I found this place early, at the very beginning of my career, actually, and I've been fortunate to grow with it, help build it into something I could be proud of, and that I want everybody that works here to be proud of being a part of. And so I often. It makes you laugh when I hear friends who are complaining about their job or they're complaining about having to go to work. I'm like, I actually kind of like going to work. I really enjoy what I get to do. It is a true blessing. We're all very fortunate to be here. Those of you who've worked with our staff out there know that passion comes through. They really, really enjoy, from reception to accounting to the biologists and technicians in the field, just absolutely have a real joy and passion for what they do here. And that's critical to what we do and to making sure we're passing that along to those landowners we're working with every day. So really, really glad to have you here, excited to have you here. I'm excited we get to talk more about pigs and other things that you know way more about than anybody else here. I'm getting to tap into your experience and expertise so we can share that with our listeners and our landowners.
Real quick opportunity for a shameless plug.
Yep.
I mentioned the James G. Tier Conservation Leadership Institute through the Texas chapter and that early career professional training that's under that umbrella. I am the director of the early career professional training.
That's right.
And it is about to kick off. We're about to call for applicants. So this is just a shameless call for any young natural resource professionals out there. And you don't have to be a wildlife biologist. You could be a rangeland specialist. We've had folks there that are entomologists and that are from the fisheries world. And we welcome that. We like the diversity and the different perspectives to go through those things. So keep a lookout for calls for applications, and please don't hesitate to reach out if there's any questions about that.
Very good. Yeah, absolutely. The young professionals out there, pay attention to that. Again, it is a fantastic program we've got. And I didn't even mention all the Plateau folks who've been through that program. We've got some more current and former employees. Excellent program. We should, while we're talking about programs for the Texas chapter, talk about conservation camps too.
Absolutely.
For those of you with, it's teenage, right? High school age?
High school age, yes.
High school age kids, children who are have some interest in natural resources. The conservation camps are an excellent way to distract them for part of the summer. So you want to mention that
Sure.
briefly at least.
The conservation camp's been around for a very long time. It was the first program under the Tier Institute's umbrella. And again, the high school age kids come out, and it's like a college semester of natural resource training crammed into 1 week. And it's intense, but it's led by a bunch of very passionate folks, and they do a really good job. I cannot recommend that program anymore. And the coolest thing about this summer's, which the applications have already closed for this year, but keep a lookout. They're going to be at the Davis Mountain Preserve this year.
Yeah.
And that's just, on its own, that's just a really cool place to be.
Absolutely. Again, your West Texas bias showing up. So they do that every summer, right? So and feel free to, send us a note and ask us about that. We're happy to point you there in that direction. Yeah, I wish there had been something like that or that I had known about.
Right.
I wish there had been, and I'd known about it when I was of that age. I'd have been all over something like that. Excellent way to get hands-on. That hands-on experience we were talking about earlier that some of us didn't get, until college or even grad school in some cases. So they can get it as a high school student. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Your Texas Land. We hope you enjoyed hearing more from John and myself on his path to Plateau, his background as a wildlife professional, and a little bit about wild pigs and the Texas chapter. We had a wide variety of things today. If any of it interests you, you want to know more, do let us know. We're happy we can cover a whole podcast on some of those topics too. So thank you, John, for joining us today. We're glad to have you here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And until next time, keep being an advocate for Texas land. Thanks for listening.